The regional champion looked at the old woman standing at the edge of his mat and started laughing before she'd even set her bag down. "Ma'am, this isn't a yoga class," he said, loud enough for the entire gym to hear. The room erupted in laughter. She didn't react. She simply tightened the wrap around her left hand, stepped onto the mat, and waited. What happened next lasted just 4 seconds. When it was over, the regional champion was still on the mat, unable to get back to his feet. But that wasn't what made the entire gym fall silent. An elderly master seated quietly in the back slowly rose to his feet, staring at the woman as if he had just seen someone he never expected to see again. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, "It can't be. Stay with us." Because the woman everyone laughed at was carrying a past no one in that gym was prepared to believe. Ironclad Gym occupied a converted warehouse on the edge of a mid-sized city, the kind of place that had built its reputation over 15 years on producing regional champions, a handful of national qualifiers, and one fighter who'd gone on to a modest UFC career before retiring to open his own gym across town. It was not a place people wandered into by accident. It was a place people earned their way into, or believed they had, and that belief showed in the way everyone who trained there carried themselves, shoulders back, chins level, the specific posture of people who had decided, collectively, what strength was supposed to look like. The regional champion was a man named Tyler Brooks, 29 years old, undefeated in his weight class for the past 3 years, with the kind of build that came from a decade of disciplined training and the kind of confidence that came from never once having that discipline tested by someone the room didn't expect to lose. The gym's head coach, a compact, quiet man in his 70s named Sensei sat in a folding chair near the back wall most afternoons, watching more than he spoke, running the gym's advanced program with a reputation for technical precision that had outlasted 3 decades of trend cycles in martial arts training. Nobody at Ironclad asked Coben many personal questions. He answered the ones about technique in complete detail and the ones about his life before the gym with a silence so consistent that people had simply stopped trying. The woman walked in on a Thursday afternoon in October, during the gym's open sparring hour, when the mats were busiest and the crowd of watchers along the walls was thickest. She was somewhere in her 60s, silver hair cut short and unfussy, wearing a plain gray hoodie, worn sweatpants, and shoes that had clearly logged more miles walking than running. She carried a canvas duffel bag that looked older than most of the equipment in the gym, its strap patched with a different, faded fabric where it had once torn. She moved through the front door without hesitation, scanned the room once, and walked directly to the edge of the main mat, where she set her bag down and began, without asking anyone's permission, to unzip it. Tyler noticed her first, mostly because his training partners noticed her first and started nudging each other and grinning in the specific way young men grin when they've collectively decided something is funny before they've bothered to think about why. "Can I help you with something?" Tyler called out, not quite unkindly, but with the easy condescension of someone who has never once had to consider that the answer might embarrass him. "I'd like to spar," the woman said. Her voice was even, unhurried, carrying no particular urgency about being taken seriously. Tyler blinked, then grinned, glancing toward his training partners for the audience he already knew he had. "Spar," he repeated. "With who?" "You'll do." The gym went quiet for a beat, then erupted into the kind of laughter that comes from disbelief rather than genuine humor. Tyler's grin widened. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for the entire gym to hear, "this isn't a yoga class." The room erupted again, louder this time, several of the watching fighters slapping the mat or each other's shoulders in appreciation of the line. The woman didn't react. She reached into her bag, pulled out a roll of hand wrap, and began winding it methodically around her left hand. The motion practiced and unhurried, the kind of motion that belonged to someone who had wrapped their hands a great many more times than anyone currently watching her. Sensei Coben, seated in his folding chair near the back wall, had not laughed. He had gone very still the moment the woman walked through the door, his eyes tracking her with an intensity that none of the young fighters around him had noticed, because none of them were watching him. They were watching Tyler, and the joke, and the old woman who apparently hadn't understood the joke was on her. "All right," Tyler said, still grinning, stepping onto the mat and rolling his shoulders in an exaggerated warm-up gesture meant more for the audience than for his muscles. Light contact. We'll go easy on you. That won't be necessary, the woman said. Tyler laughed once more, a short exhale through his nose, and gestured for her to step onto the mat properly. She did, setting her feet in a stance that most of the watching fighters didn't immediately register as unusual, because it looked, at first glance, almost too simple. No exaggerated guard, no theatrical posturing, just a low, settled weight distribution and hands positioned with an economy that suggested she wasn't planning to need very many of the motions the gym's standard curriculum spent years teaching. The gym's assistant coach called the start. What happened next lasted 4 seconds. Tyler moved first, a probing jab meant to establish range, the kind of opening move he'd thrown thousands of times against opponents who required him to feel out distance before committing to anything more serious. He never got the chance to feel anything out. The woman's response wasn't a block in any sense the gym's fighters would have recognized from their own training. It was a redirection, small and economical, that used the momentum of his own jab to open a line directly into his center of balance. Her hand found his wrist. Her hip rotated. And Tyler Brooks, regional champion, undefeated for 3 years, was airborne for a fraction of a second before he landed flat on his back on the mat. The wind driven out of him in a single sharp exhale that was the loudest sound in the gym for several long seconds afterward. He did not get up. He lay there, blinking at the ceiling, his hands twitching slightly at his sides, trying and failing to reconstruct, in real time, what had actually happened to him. The laughter in the gym had stopped entirely, but the silence that followed wasn't about Tyler. Sensei Kobin had risen from his folding chair. He was standing now at the edge of the mat, his weathered face carrying an expression none of his students had ever seen on him before, not the composed neutrality he brought to every technical correction, not even the rare flicker of approval he gave when someone executed a difficult technique cleanly. This was something else, something that looked, to the handful of students perceptive enough to notice it, uncomfortably close to disbelief. "It can't be," he said, so quietly that only the students standing nearest to him heard it at all. The woman turned toward him. For the first time since she'd walked through the door, something shifted in her own expression, not surprise, exactly, but the specific recognition of someone encountering a piece of their own past they hadn't necessarily expected to find in a converted warehouse gym on a Thursday afternoon. "Arita," she said. Nobody in that gym, not even the fighters who had trained under Kobin for years, had ever heard anyone address him by his first name. If you've ever been the person nobody expected anything from right before you showed them exactly what you were capable of, like this video right now, because what Sensei Kobin says next is the reason nobody at this gym has ever underestimated a stranger again. Kobin crossed the remaining distance between them slowly, the specific, deliberate pace of a man, giving himself time to confirm something his eyes had already told him. He stopped a few feet from her, studying her face with the intensity of someone cross-referencing a memory against the present. "May," he said, "it really is you." The woman, May, allowed something that wasn't quite a smile to cross her face. "It's been a long time, Arita." 31 years, Kobin said. "I looked for you. After the program ended. I looked for a long time." Tyler, still lying on the mat, had managed to prop himself up on one elbow, his face a mixture of physical disorientation and the dawning, uncomfortable realization that something significant was happening around him that had nothing to do with him at all. "You two know each other," he managed, his voice still slightly breathless. Kobin didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on May. "We trained together," he said. "A long time ago. In a program that doesn't exist anymore. That officially never existed at all." The gym had gone entirely silent now. Every fighter and watcher along the wall straining to hear a conversation that was being conducted in the unhurried, careful tones of two people who had a great deal of history and very little need to perform any of it for an audience. "What program?" one of the younger fighters asked, unable to help himself. Kobin turned toward the room, seeming to remember, for the first time since May had walked through the door, that he had an audience of his own students watching this unfold. He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "In the early 1990s, he said, a small number of people were selected for a joint training program that combined traditional close-quarters combat systems with methods developed specifically for scenarios that conventional military and law enforcement training didn't adequately prepare people for. Hostage extraction, close protection details, and hostile environments. Situations where the difference between surviving an encounter and not surviving it came down to a fraction of a second and a level of technical precision that most training programs never demanded of their students. He paused, looking back at May. There were 11 of us, across 3 years of training. Most went on to careers that were never publicly documented. A few didn't survive long enough to have careers at all. His jaw tightened slightly. May was the best of all of us. Better than me. Better than anyone I trained with before or after. May said nothing to contradict this. She simply stood, hands still wrapped, watching Coben with the patient attention of someone who had known this conversation was coming from the moment she'd recognized him across the gym. Then the program ended. Coben continued. Abruptly. Nobody explained why. We were simply told it no longer existed, that we should return to civilian life, and that any further contact with each other or with our former instructors would not be looked upon favorably by certain people whose favor mattered a great deal at the time. He looked at May directly now. You disappeared before any of us had the chance to say goodbye properly. I heard rumors, over the years, that you'd gone overseas, that you died, that you'd simply walked away from everything and built a life so quiet nobody could find you even if they'd wanted to. The last one, May said. Mostly. Tyler had finally managed to sit up fully, still processing both his own physical humiliation and the specific, uncomfortable feeling of having badly misjudged a situation in a way that was only now becoming clear to him. Wait, he said. So you're saying she's Dash? I'm saying, Coben said, cutting him off without raising his voice, that the technique she used to put you on this mat is not something available in any curriculum you have ever trained under, in this gym or anywhere else in this country. I'm saying that 4 seconds is, if anything, generous, because in the environment that technique was originally developed for seconds was usually the difference between someone walking away and someone not walking away at all. He looked around at his assembled students. I am saying that you laughed at a woman today whose training makes everyone in this room, myself included, look like beginners. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans right now, because what happens over the next several days at this gym is the reason people are still talking about the woman who walked in wearing an old gray hoodie and left as a living legend. The gym remained quiet for a long moment after Coben's explanation, the specific quiet of a room recalibrating its own assumptions in real time. Tyler, still seated on the mat, looked up at May with an expression that had moved entirely past embarrassment into something closer to genuine, unguarded curiosity. Would you teach me that? He asked. What you just did. May considered him for a moment. There was no unkindness in her expression, but there was also no immediate warmth in it either. The careful, measuring look of someone deciding how much of herself was worth extending to a stranger who had, an hour earlier, made a joke about yoga classes in front of an audience. That depends, she said, on whether you're willing to unlearn most of what you think you already know. Tyler didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his own hands, flexing them slowly, still working through the physical memory of exactly how easily he'd been put on the ground by someone he'd assumed, based on nothing more than her age and her clothing, couldn't possibly pose him any threat at all. Yeah, he said finally. I think I am. Coben, watching this exchange, allowed himself something that was almost a smile. She was always better at teaching than she gave herself credit for, he said, to no one in particular. Perhaps some things haven't changed as much as 31 years would suggest. May didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she looked around the gym, at the mats, the heavy bags along the far wall, the trophy case near the entrance filled with regional championship plaques and photographs of fighters who had, at some point, believed themselves to be the most dangerous people in any room they walked into. I didn't come here to teach anyone anything, she said. I came here because I saw a sign on the highway advertising open sparring hours, and I hadn't sparred with anyone in longer than I'd like to admit, and I was curious whether my body still remembered what my mind never entirely forgot. And does it? Coben asked. May glanced down at Tyler, still seated on the mat, then back at Coben. Apparently, she said. The gym's owner, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Frank Delgado, who had watched the entire exchange unfold from behind the front counter with the particular helplessness of someone realizing his gym had just become the site of something significantly larger than a Thursday afternoon sparring session, approached the mat slowly, as though official confirmation of what he was watching might make it easier to process. "Ma'am," he said, addressing May with considerably more care than anyone in the building had shown her an hour earlier. "Would you be willing to come back? Not to spar. I mean, if you'd ever consider teaching a class. Even just once." May looked at him for a long moment, then at Coben, then around the gym at the assembled fighters who had, only an hour before, been laughing at the idea of her stepping onto their mat at all. "I'll think about it," she said. It wasn't a yes. It also wasn't a no. She spent the rest of that afternoon in a quiet corner of the gym with Coben, the two of them talking in low voices about people and places neither mentioned by name in front of anyone else, occasionally falling into long silences that seemed to carry as much weight as anything either of them said aloud. The gym's regular activity resumed slowly around them, fighters returning to their drills and sparring rounds with a new, subtle carefulness in how they approached anyone they didn't already know. Tyler, once he'd fully recovered his breath and most of his composure, spent nearly 20 minutes standing near the edge of the mat, watching May and Coben's quiet conversation from a respectful distance, working through something that looked, on his face, less like humiliation and more like the specific discomfort of a young man reconsidering an entire framework he'd built his identity around. "I've been training for 11 years, he said, finally approaching Coben after May had stepped away briefly to refill her water bottle. "I've never been put down like that. Not once. Not by anyone." "No," Coben agreed. "You wouldn't have been. The kind of training she has isn't something available to civilians. It was designed specifically to work against people exactly like you, strong, fast, well-trained in conventional systems, completely unprepared for someone operating from an entirely different set of principles." "What principles?" Coben considered the question carefully. "Conventional combat sports train you to win exchanges," he said. "Points, positioning, controlled aggression within a rule set everyone has agreed to in advance. What May was trained to do has nothing to do with winning an exchange. It's designed to end a situation as quickly and completely as possible, using the minimum force necessary, because in the environments that training was built for, prolonging any confrontation even a few extra seconds could mean the difference between everyone walking away and no one walking away." He looked toward where May stood near the water station, quietly observing the gym's ordinary Thursday afternoon rhythms resuming around her. "There is no rule set in what she does. There is only the outcome." Tyler absorbed this in silence for a long moment. "Do you think she'd actually consider coming back? To teach?" Coben's expression shifted into something contemplative. "I don't know," he said honestly. "May disappeared very thoroughly, a long time ago, for reasons I was never fully told and never entirely understood. If she walked back into a gym today, after 31 years of staying invisible, it wasn't an accident. People like her don't do anything by accident." He paused. "Whatever brought her here, I suspect it was something more than curiosity about whether her body still remembered old training." May returned a few minutes later, her expression unreadable, and the three of them sat together near the edge of the mat as the gym's afternoon session wound down around them, fighters filtering out toward the locker rooms in twos and threes. Several of them glancing back toward the quiet corner where the woman who had put their regional champion on the mat in 4 seconds sat talking with their sensei, like old friends reuniting after a war neither had ever discussed with anyone else. "Why now, May?" Coben asked eventually, once most of the gym had cleared out and the three of them were nearly alone. "After all this time." May was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her still-wrapped hands. "My husband passed away 8 months ago," she said. "We had a quiet life. He never knew the details of what I did before I met him, only that there were things I didn't discuss, and he respected that without ever pushing. After he was gone, I found myself with a great deal of silence I didn't know what to do with." She looked up. "I saw the gym sign from the highway. I don't entirely know what I expected to find here. I don't think I expected to find you." Coben nodded slowly, something in his weathered face softening in a way none of his students, had any remained to see it, would have recognized. "I retired from the program's aftermath the same way most of us did," he said, quietly, without ceremony. "I built this gym because I needed somewhere to put 30 years of training that no longer had an obvious purpose, and teaching seemed like the least destructive way to do that." He looked around at the empty mats. "I never expected any of it to bring me back to anyone from before. I assumed that door had been closed for good. Doors reopen, May said. Sometimes when you least expect them to. Frank Delgado, the gym's owner, approached again as the last few students filtered out, his earlier nervousness replaced by something more deliberate. I meant what I said, he told May. About teaching. I don't know what your situation is, or what brought you here, and I won't pretend I fully understand what I watched happen on that mat an hour ago. But if you're looking for something to do with your time, this gym would be lucky to have you. May looked at him, then at Coben, then around the quiet gym one more time, taking in the trophy case, the heavy bags, the mat where a regional champion had learned, in 4 seconds, exactly how much he still had to learn. I'll come back Tuesday, she said. We'll see how it goes. It wasn't a full commitment. It also wasn't a refusal, and for a woman who had spent 31 years being extremely careful about which doors she walked back through, it was, Coben understood without needing it explained to him, close enough to a yes. She returned the following Tuesday, as promised, and the Tuesday after that, and within 2 months, Ironclad Gym's advanced program had quietly split into 2 tracks. One still run by Coben in the style the gym had always known, and a smaller, invitation-only class run by a woman most of the fighters still knew only as May, who taught with the same unhurried, economical precision she'd used to end Tyler Brooks's undefeated confidence in 4 seconds flat. Tyler was in that smaller class every single week, arriving early, staying late, absorbing every correction with the specific hunger of someone who had discovered, at 29 years old, that everything he thought he'd mastered was only the beginning of a much larger conversation about what mastery actually meant. He never fully explained to his regular training partners what had changed in him after that Thursday afternoon. He didn't need to. They could see it in the way he moved differently now, more economically, less interested in impressing anyone watching from the sidelines, and more interested in the quiet, technical precision that May brought to every session. The same precision that had put him on his back in 4 seconds and had spent every week since teaching him exactly why. Coben never fully explained, either, what those 31 years apart had actually contained, for either of them, and his students learned, gradually, not to ask. Some silences, they came to understand, weren't meant to be filled. They were simply meant to be respected, the way you respect a door that reopens on its own schedule, offering exactly as much as it chooses to offer, and no more. Sometimes the most dangerous people in any room are the ones nobody thinks to take seriously until it's far too late to matter. They don't announce what they're capable of. They don't need anyone's belief to make their training real. They simply walk through the door, wait to be underestimated, and let the outcome speak for itself. Share this story if you believe there are legends still walking among us, waiting quietly for the moment someone finally asks the right question. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans for everyone who has ever been laughed at, dismissed, or written off before they had the chance to show exactly what they were capable of. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever underestimated someone who turned out to be far more than they appeared? What city are you watching from tonight?